Peter R. Breggin, MD, is called the conscience of psychiatry for his many decades of successful reform efforts. His scientific and educational work provide the foundation for modern criticism of drugs and ECT and lead the way in promoting more caring and effective therapies. His books include Talking Back to Prozac, Toxic Psychiatry, Medication Madness, Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, and now, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming Negative Emotions. Welcome to the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour.
Hello, my wonderful audience. If I sound like I have a cold, I have a cold. And I may give a big sneeze out that I can't get to the mute button in time to stop you hearing it. So bear with me, and no catastrophe has happened if you hear odd noises in the background. I have a bit of an introduction as usual, but let me check with Joanna Moncrieff, who's in London, the
Hello,
wonderful
Peter,
psychiatrist. Hi, Hi, Joanna, you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, Peter.
Oh, good. I'm really glad to hear your voice on the air again. I want to have you on more often as I hone in more on having my favorites on the air. Now, folks, you know, probably you're listening to PRN FM, but you might not because you may be listening on one sort or another of a device or app or something. And I'm Peter Breggin, Breggin. The best way to follow what I do and to follow what the shows are about is to get my frequent alerts free. And we email them out. It's kind of like a newsletter, but much more to the point and much no advertising. And it's really just highlights that I want you to know about what I'm doing, what the show is doing. And that's on Breggin.com. Breggin.com. You get the frequent alerts. And, of course, it's 4 p.m. Wednesday. And if you're listening on 4 p.m. Wednesday, New York time, March 20th, you can call in. And Joanna, the last time you were on, I don't think we could take callers. We weren't taking callers. The call-in number is 888-874-4888. 888-874-4888. And remember, we have an archives on Breggin.com and a special hotmail that you can communicate to me on, which is bregginlive@hotmail.com. And I want to tell you a little bit about the breaking news, which is changes daily, pretty much, on Breggin.com. And we've got some interesting stuff there that my assistant Ian put up, and I wanted to share with you. He's got a lot of different articles on different things that make us happy or don't make us happy. And he's got an article on the relationship between money and happiness, and I think it confirms that it's good to have a certain amount of money, but as it escalates, it does not lead to happiness or good living necessarily. And with all the hype on marijuana, there's some more research that the new high-potency marijuana is causing psychosis, as I've been saying it would, and it did, in both clinical experience of mine and scientific. And then for the positive side, some more that beautiful places make us happy. What do you know? Well, psychiatrists don't know this, so we have to do that. We have to just write a little article. Beautiful places make us happy. Stuff like that. Money makes us happy. Smoking marijuana may not make us happy. So that comes out very conventionally to don't smoke so much marijuana, make some money, live in a beautiful place. Another one I found interesting is that exercise, as we know, helps with depression, and so does sports help, people not be depressed, or it helps toward happiness. But there's an article on team sports and team training is quite a bit more powerful in helping us feel better about our lives. And that is just such a theme of my work. And increasingly, as I talk about, and Joanna, I've been sort of blogging a little bit about this, that all disorders in a way are disorders of love, and all healing is about loving, caring relationships. And we'll be putting up, if by the time the show is over, on the breaking news, Ian, my assistant's going to put up an article by a psychologist named Van Oss, and OS. And he's got a big review out. Oh, it's complex. It's hard to understand. It's so academic that he got it published in the World Psychiatric Journal. I mean, you have to be pretty complex because what he said needed to be hidden from the World Psychiatric Association. And what it is that, he's saying that what the research really shows on treatment, the clearest thing is the importance of loving, supportive relationships in recovery, treatment, happiness. So the world is seeing all of that. Joanna, she is an old friend, Joanna Moncrieff. She's senior lecturer at the University College of London. She's a founder and a co-chair of the Critical Psychiatry Network that I'm a member of. And John, you were just made president of it? Elected?
No, we don't have a president. It's just...
What were you just elected to?
I was elected to a position in the Royal College, a position on a committee, the Committee of Adult Psychiatry in the Royal College of Psychiatrists in London.
Oh, that's a really big deal. So this is a person who keeps, you must have many feet, one foot here and 1 foot there, and 1 foot solid in the establishment.
Well, I'm
so
hoping
congratulations on that. You were getting so many congratulations on CPN about being president that I got confused and thought you must have been elected to a position there. But that's interesting. Maybe we could leap into how do you manage this? And also, we don't have people in the United States that are like you, at least hardly any.
I think you have a few because I meet some of them when I come over. But yes, I mean, we're in a minority, I suppose, psychiatrists who are, critical of the profession and its activities. But that's why I started up the Critical Psychiatry Network, really was to get us together so that we could support each other and produce a body of work like your work, Peter, that you were, doing on your own for quite a while. That puts another point of view across, but that's out there for people to be able to go to if they're questioning what they're, what's in the mainstream, what they're being told by their doctor or psychiatrist.
I wrote today, Joanna, that I had gotten criticized a little bit on the Critical Psychiatry Network folks for going black and white on ECT and saying we should stop it. And I wrote in today that and teased a little bit that I was still black and white to some extent about things, and that as much as I was critical of a lot of people on CPN for just not looking at some of the evil in psychiatry, they were way ahead of America. I mean, there's such a difference between the psychiatric communities in the two countries.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Critical Psychiatry Network is quite a broad network, and most people on it are working psychiatrists. And one of the problems, I think, Peter, is, when you're working in the system, sometimes it's difficult to resist pressure to put people on medication or give people ECT, even if you don't really think it's the best thing to do. For example, in the UK, there's a lot of pressure there aren't many inpatient beds anymore, so there's a lot of pressure to get people out of hospital quickly. So, if someone's not getting better, people will start saying, we've got to try this, we've got to try that, and finally it'll be, we've got to try ECT. So I think doctors come under a lot of pressure to administer these things, even when they don't feel very, comfortable about it. And I think that's partly what members of the Critical Psychiatry Network are expressing when they express some support for ECT. Because I know that there are other members who, who totally agree with you and think that it's, it's something that we just ought to get rid of.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, folks, Joanna's written several very good books, very documented, very incisive. One of them is The Bitterest Pills, which focuses on the antipsychotic drugs, as I recall.
Right.
And The Myth of the Chemical Cure, which really looks at that issue in depth. And then a straight-talking introduction to psychiatric drugs. Now, Joanna actually draws on some of my concept at times. She has discussed my concept of deactivation as being a basic chemical effect, or how we can look at it, especially with the antipsychotics. And she talked about the brain disabling principle that I talk about. Now, I think if a psychiatrist in an institution in America did that, they'd be in deep trouble. Do you ever get in trouble for mentioning me, talking about my work that is so threatening to the establishment?
First of all, Peter, I'm totally in your debt. I mean, I think the brain disabling treatment is the key principle that we need to understand what drugs are doing. I totally agree with you that when we think drugs might be having some beneficial effects, what we're saying is we like this state of, being slightly inhibited, impaired by the drugs more than we like the state that people were in before. And that all the drugs that we use are dampening down, numbing, knocking off to some extent various brain functions. So I think that's such a key principle. I get different reactions from groups of psychiatrists. There are some that feel very threatened by that sort of idea, and I guess those people would probably find your name, very frightening. But there are certainly some psychiatrists in the UK who are, just ordinary psychiatrists getting on with their job who are sympathetic to that point of view. Particularly people who maybe grew up in a time when there was more emphasis on therapy, more emphasis on, taking a holistic approach. So there are plenty of people who are sympathetic and who accept that idea. So that's nice. It's not all challenge, but certainly It is challenging to a lot of people. Yeah.
It's interesting that Great Britain has so many better psychiatrists, so many people more willing to speak out. And I would have anticipated that since you have single payer or socialized medicine, that it would be even more crushing to free thinking. But it's not true. I mean, my assumption about that has not panned out. And you have Sammy Tamimi, who was at the conference that we were at not long ago.
But I think, Peter, I think this is a really interesting issue. I mean, my view from over here is that in a privatized system, there's much more incentive for psychiatrists to inappropriately medicalize people. For psychiatrists to say, oh, yes, you're ill, give me the money, I'm going to get you better. Whereas there's no incentive to do that in the United Kingdom. The incentive is actually to try and keep people out of the services and encourage their own resources because you're not paid by the number of people that you're seeing, and the resources are always inadequate to meet all the demands, all the desperate people that are out there looking for answers that we've dangled in front of them, saying you might have a mental illness. So I think a socialized system in some ways helps to scale back the level of inappropriate medicalization and inappropriate treatment.
Now, do you see, this is so interesting, and I find it interesting to have my own issues so confronted and making me think and try to rethink what in the world is the best system, both for politics and for delivery of psychiatry. And as you know, I really do tend toward, believing so much in freedom and small government. What is your sense around Europe? I mean, I get a sense, for example, that ECT is used less frequently in Europe than the U.S., and I get the impression that the numbers of ECT are less frequent, and that would fit with you don't make money from every additional ECT. I mean, the doctors in the U.S. that create shock mills, they're getting insurance from a fairly socialized system, mostly from Medicare, but they're getting paid by Medicare for the numbers of people that they shock and for the number of shocks they give them. So I have not looked at that difference between that and Great Britain. So that a doctor wouldn't gain anything from using 20 treatments rather than 6?
No. And I think, I can't swear to the figures either, but I think ECT is used less commonly in the UK than it is in the US. And its use declined quite a bit about 10 to 20 years ago. And I'm not quite sure why that was, actually. But, I'll tell you, some of the reasons were to do with some patient activists who were actually saying how horrible it had been, what terrible experiences they had had. And they had quite an influence on the NICE guidelines. These are the guidelines that are produced by the government in the UK that give recommendations for treatments for all medical conditions. And the NICE guidelines on ECT, although they didn't ban it by any means, but they were quite conservative. They were only suggesting it should only be used in extreme circumstances and, only very, very rarely if people weren't consenting. So, and that was, as I say, partly a product of the fact that there were various people who'd been given ECT who spoke out against it very assertively. So I think that was part of the reason why its use went down. But it is still used.
I don't think that in our country we have a very vigorous patient movement. It's gone under different names at different times. Consumers, it's usually a little less confrontational groups, and survivors who are more confrontational. And their impact on the government, I think, like on the FDA. I mean, it just bounces off. It's like, shooting popcorn at a tank. And, our FDA, well, I was in a major lawsuit. I was the expert in a big lawsuit against one of the manufacturers, a manufacturer of Thymatron here in the U.S., one of only 2 manufacturers. And it's called Somatics, Inc. And a judge, based on my answers to the challenge, said there is enough scientific information that ECT causes brain damage to send it to a jury. And that was a big deal, and Somatics immediately settled. And then in a big breakthrough, they sent a notice to the FDA that they were now acknowledging that electroshock caused brain damage, which was astonishing. And then within a week, the FDA ended years and years of negotiating by approving ECT for treatment-resistant depressed patients, which just opens up everything. Because what is treatment-resistant? They didn't even specify that they were resistant to drugs or to drugs or 10 or to psychotherapy even. Yeah. So now the FDA, without ever having these machines tested, according to FDA rules and regulations, has just gone ahead and approved it. And I think really opened up the way to a lot more ECT, because any psychiatrist, patients are treatment resistant to almost all of our psychiatrists, because our psychiatrists are mostly very remote characters. They're authoritarian. They're not friendly. They don't relate well. They give drugs. So naturally, patients are treatment resistant. And, it's a terrible situation. So I think it's going to get worse here. And it sounds like it's getting a little better, at least over in your country.
It had done, but it's not going away. And recently there was some coverage on the news media about ECT, and of course, the Royal College and all the sort of representatives of psychiatry are out there defending it, saying what a good treatment it is. I was just thinking in relation to you presenting the evidence on brain damage, I came across a very interesting paper the other day, published in 1979, on ECT, organic deficit syndrome. And I thought, how interesting. This was published in a, mainstream academic journal documenting the signs of organic brain damage following ECT. It wouldn't be put like that now, would it? People just talk about the amnesia as if it's just, just some sort of isolated problem and short-term problem. But this problem, the fact that ECT was causing some brain damage was widely acknowledged, and the figures in this paper, the paper describes a cohort of people who've had ECT, and they're describing about half of them as suffering from this, what they call organic deficit syndrome.
I don't know that I know this paper, which is a little surprising. I don't think it's up on my 123ECT.com. I have a resource
I'll send
center
it to you, but it's saying the same thing that you've been saying, that you get this post-ECT, it's like a sort of concussion syndrome, isn't it, people?
Yes, it is.
Like
a very serious concussion,
syndrome.
One that would actually be a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
Joanna, can you
absolutely.
send me that article?
Yes, of course, I will do, yes.
Yeah, because I'll put it up. I want to read it, and I'll put it up on the 123 ECT.
I just thought it was interesting that at that time people were honest enough to call it an organic deficit syndrome. Whereas they wouldn't be, nowadays the idea, everyone maintains that there's no deficit, there's no brain damage.
Do you remember the author offhand? Just curious.
No, I can't, I'm afraid. It wasn't
Who in the world would
anyone
have done anything like that?
But I will send it to you.
This is really, really interesting. I don't want to get too much. I've kind of directed us onto the CT issue, and I also, without thinking about it, got us into the differences in the countries. I mean, in this country, if you're a young resident, you get bullied into doing ECT.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it, you'll get fired, and you won't have a lot of recourses, even though we're not a monolithic, health system. You'll get blackballed.
So that is the same in the UK, Peter. And a few years ago, myself and a few colleagues actually wrote a letter to the Royal College of Psychiatrists saying that we felt that trainee psychiatrists should be able to morally object to ECT in the same way and be excused from doing it in the same way that people can object to doing abortions, doing termination of pregnancies. We felt that the situations were comparable and people ought to be able to object, but the Royal College were rejected that and insisted that trainees had to do ECT and that they would not countenance any moral objections. So
yes, Leonard Frank is gone now. He had the insulin coma treatment, and Leonard taught me years ago that, I'm talking about the 70s, that making doctors do ECT, and this is his comparison, was like the SS. We had to kill somebody before you could become a full-fledged member. And having the Royal College take a stand that they must do ECT kind of smacks of, we're going to keep these people in line, make them do the worst. I mean, it's probably not a conscious thread. Yeah.
It's funny you mention insulin coma therapy because I've been reading about that, and that was horrendous. I mean, that was so
I actually
dangerous.
Saw that, Joanna, when I was a volunteer.
Did you? It must have been fascinating, but it was so frightening. They had people in these comas for hours. People were twitching and shaking and fitting and, unresponsive. But of course, it made the psychiatrists and the nursing staff and all the staff of the old asylums feel that they were doing something terribly important, terribly medical, as if they were saving lives in an accident and emergency department, partly because of the consequences of the therapy they were giving. That would make people so ill they'd then have to, get the oxygen out and have the resus team on hand. And so, yes, it became a sort of medical ritual that created this identity of people as these heroic doctors and nurses who were saving these poor patients. And there's still something a little bit of that, I think, in ECT.
Oh,
for
God.
The people who support it.
But it's a pretty limited number of docs who make all this money from doing that. But I think so. They think it's heroic, and that's a term, folks, of art. Heroic treatment, like where you leap on someone's chest, and when you're a surgeon and the chest is closed, so you have to, pump the heart, break ribs in the process, and hope you're saving the person. And and psychiatrists are just dying to have their own heroic treatments. Joanna, let's switch to some positive stuff, and maybe positive. What's happening in Europe and in your experience with psychiatric drug withdrawal? Because there's a lot going on there, and you're involved in research. Catch me up on the whole scope.
I mean, there are two issues. One is that I'm running this trial of antipsychotic withdrawal, and it's a randomized controlled trial, and we're comparing standard maintenance treatment with antipsychotics for people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia or psychosis of some sort, with a gradual supported reduction program. And the incredible thing is really that this has never been done before, because all the trials that have been done before have just put people straight on a placebo without doing a proper gradual reduction. And the previous trials haven't followed people up for very long, have only really looked at relapse rates and defined that in numerous different ways. So we're trying to really establish, what happens if you help people to come off these medications gradually, or reasonably gradually, probably not quite as slowly as we, ideally like to, but fairly gradually. And that study has been funded by the British government, by the Research and Development Wing of the National Health Service. So I think it was, very brave of them and commendable of them to fund it. And it's running well. We've got 156 patients entered and randomized now. We're doing it in about 12 or 13 different areas of the country. And we are finding psychiatrists who are helping, who are putting patients forward and helping to monitor the reduction. So that's been a really positive thing. Not everyone will help out, and I've certainly come across plenty of psychiatrists who say, no, I'm not doing that, don't be ridiculous, people need their medication. But I've met a lot of people who've been helpful, so that's been a nice experience. We haven't got the results yet, but we haven't been closed down. We would have been shut down if it was a total disaster and everyone was relapsing instantly. So it's it's not going too badly, and hopefully we'll have results it'll still be a couple of years, because we want to have a decent follow-up. Because what I expect will happen is there will be some increase in relapse over the short term. That's what you would expect. But that doesn't necessarily mean that people will, do worse in the long term. And there might be some long-term benefits for people if we can get them off antipsychotics, even if we can get a proportion of people off antipsychotics, or if we can get them onto substantially lower doses of antipsychotics. So that's the aim, and that's going well. And I hear that there are plans to possibly do a similar trial in the Netherlands as well. So I think there is some interest in. I think there's some concern about, just putting people on long-term antipsychotic treatment, and a recognition that these drugs are, really very toxic and need to be avoided if we possibly can avoid them. And so I think that's been a positive development, and generally running the trial's been a positive experience. And then the other issue we've been talking quite a lot about here in the UK recently, Peter, is antidepressant withdrawal. And this came about because some people produced a review of the literature on antidepressant withdrawal. That was a psychologist called John Reed and an anthropologist called James Davis. And they got together all the evidence that exists on antidepressant withdrawal, and they concluded that, contrary to official statements, quite a high proportion of people experience withdrawal symptoms from antidepressants, probably around about 50%. And for some of those, the withdrawal syndrome is very severe and can last a long time. And we don't really know what proportion of people have these very serious withdrawal syndromes, but they're definitely, documented. And so that was published, and that reflects other evidence. There had been previous reviews suggesting this as well, that with slightly less evidence. So Reed and Davis sort of got together all the latest evidence. But then two psychiatrists in the UK wrote a blog saying, this is not a very good paper. The evidence here is, just really ropey and we can't trust it. And antidepressants are fine, and it's wrong to be critical of them, and they're worried about people not being prescribed them. And then there was a response from the authors of the paper and some other people saying, that psychiatrists, as represented by these two psychiatrists who wrote this blog, don't seem to be able to acknowledge that this is a real problem. They're ignoring, lots of people who've had difficulties coming off antidepressants, playing down the severity of their withdrawal symptoms. So there's been quite a lot of media coverage of the whole debate, which I think has been really useful. And for me, it's really highlighted, Peter, how little we know about the changes that taking drugs cause in the brain and cause to people's mental functioning and behavior, and what happens to those changes when you stop taking the medication. How long do those withdrawal symptoms that you experience, because your body's changed when you were taking the drug, that's why you get withdrawal symptoms, and you take the drug away and all those changes are not opposed anymore by the drug. How long do those changes persist for? Is it possible that people might have withdrawal symptoms that just go on forever? Because certainly there are some people saying they've had severe symptoms that have gone on, for years. So that's been an interesting debate, and as I say, it's really highlighted to me how little we know, how little research is really, proper good research has really been done into how taking these drugs affects the brain and affects other parts of the body, and then what happens when you try and stop them.
Yes, and of course, each of us has only such limited experience. My own, because in my case, especially now, I have a relatively small practice. I see people. I try to limit my patients to twice a week, and I do so many other things, as you know. And I'll say a couple of things that are encouraging with young people. That is high school and younger. Mm-hmm. And even in my 2-day-a-week practice, I have several of those at any time, usually. And that their recovery seems very quick and very good. Now, my basic principle is we go very slow and under the control of the patient. Folks, I mean, that's the basic principle, I think, that works, because people come in, they're terrified because they've gone cold turkey and they've gotten, or worse, the psychiatrists have taken them off cold turkey. Sometimes it feels like in anger because they wanted to come off. So I make the initial suggestion that we reduce the smallest possible amount we can figure out how to do with your pill. And let's see how you do for a few days. And then we increase it a little bit, and the person comes off their own speed, and
Yeah.
If there's a bit of too much suffering from it, we go back to the previous dose. And we have a lot of support with these youngsters from their families, usually, which is very important. And I'm not seeing with these youngsters much in the way of permanent damage. I've even had people with tardive dyskinesia in my legal work who children get so much better that the cases lose their impact because there's nothing visible anymore, even though I think they're still harmed. So, there is so little data, and it's basically the older you are and the more you've had, the harder it's going to be, common sense.
Yeah. Do you think it's partly because a young brain is more elastic, more able to replenish after when the drugs are out of the system?
Oh, I think it's, yes. So I think it's almost certainly that the brain recovers. I mean, if I cut my arm on something and a 10-year-old or a 16-year-old cuts their arm on something, you're not going to see anything on their arm in a couple of days, and I might have something forever in the way of a scar. So I think that we heal, the whole body heals so much better when you're young.
Yeah.
Although, folks, if you eat a plant-based diet, you'll heal faster and better. Have you gotten into nutrition at all? We've never talked about it together.
Not really. I don't know.
It's changed my life and my wife's life to be eating a plant-based diet. We're not pure vegetarians, but just moving and whole foods and no dairy. So, because evolutionary-wise, I think that's how we ate. We didn't, except for very rare groups, have much meat to eat, and we ate a lot of vegetables, and nobody had dairy until 10,000 years ago. But that's an aside. I don't want people screaming and tearing out their hair because I brought up nutrition again. Are we learning more and more, Joanna, about that therapy helps? Do we have good studies on that? Is that something you can talk with us about? I was thinking about that today when I read the Van Oss article and put it up on the website, because it looks at all the different therapies, and it's coming out strongly for, the therapy helps. Relationship helps.
I mean, what I know is what you say this paper concludes, that the research on therapy suggests that the type of therapy you have is not the key thing. The key issue is your relationship with your therapist and the quality of that. That's what determines people's outcome in therapy. But I'm not a specialist in the area, so I'm quoting from other people who I know have written in this area. That would be my clinical experience. That that what people need is good relationships with trusting people who are, going to help them and support them to try and access their own resources rather than any sort of very specialist technique.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Folks, let me tell you, if you'd like to ask Joanna questions, it's unusual. We've had no callers. I think partly because Joanna Moncrieff, who is our guest from Great Britain, really is really interesting, has a lot of information. And I get caught up in talking with Joanna, and I haven't reminded you to call in. And it's 888-874-4888. 888-874-4888. Call in and ask us anything that you want, that you think that either of us or both of us hopefully could be helpful with. Now, one of the issues that has come up in Great Britain, which, it doesn't even surface in the U.S., is the brain damage caused by the antipsychotic drugs. The new ones are things like Abilify and Zyprexa and Risperdal and Seroquel, and the older ones were Thorazine, which you still can get in Haldol in the U.S., put in your body for one reason or another. Now, you actually did try to get your psychiatric association to consider having a seminar on this. You tried and failed a few years ago, as I recall. What's going on in Great Britain in facing the issue that these drugs are causing shrinkage of the brain, atrophy of the brain?
So some senior psychiatrists in the UK are very concerned about this and writing about it prominently. So Robin Murray, who's very well known here and done a lot of research in biological psychiatry, he's very interested in the link between cannabis and psychosis that's been publicized today. He has been involved. He's set up a study of people who'd had a first episode of psychosis, and he's been following them up with MRI scans, and he has found that that reduction in brain volume is associated with the dose of these antipsychotic drugs. His is one of now an increasing number of studies that find this.
So this is a new person that I haven't really looked into, and the name is Murray?
Robin Murray has written a few articles recently highlighting this.
You remember his first name?
Robin Murray.
Okay.
He's a very well-known British psychiatrist, and I'm mentioning him because he's so well known and that he's really been concerned about this issue. It has had some publicity over here. Having said that, I go and talk about it a lot because I think that issue is partly why my trial got funded. This increasing research that means that you can't deny this effect anymore. I mean, Peter, you were saying this years and years ago, weren't you, that the drugs are causing brain shrinkage, and that's why we're seeing these scans with people with who the sort of chronic patients in the asylums, and the scans show that they had smaller brains and larger brain cavities. And you were saying this was to do with the drug treatment, and I think the psychiatric establishment only really started to take notice of this, well, maybe 10 years ago at the probably less than that. But there were a couple of animal studies. One was done in the US by, I think it was John Davis, who looked at macaque monkeys and compared the effects of olanzapine and haloperidol and a placebo injection, and measured the size of the monkeys' brains after 18 months of treatment, and they found that the monkeys that had the antipsychotics were 10% lighter, had 10% lighter brains than the monkeys treated with the placebo. Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? Yes, absolutely, not a trivial amount. And that study was partly funded by Eli Lilly because they were convinced at that time that olanzapine was going to come out as being neuroprotective, as stopping this brain shrinkage.
They believed their own PR.
Yeah,
oh my
they
gosh.
did, exactly. So they funded this study, which didn't confirm that at all. In that study, the brain shrinkage was slightly higher with olanzapine than with haloperidol even. So I think it's been undeniable since those studies were done. But people, I go to talks and I mention it, and people always say to me, "Oh, but what about the schizophrenia? Surely that's causing brain shrinkage. So how can you say that the drugs are causing it if people have got schizophrenia as well?" And people are so reluctant to admit that their treatments are doing harm. I think this is the same with the antidepressant issue and the sort of denial of antidepressant withdrawal problems, that, doctors in general and psychiatrists in particular really, really struggle to admit that actually sometimes their drugs are harmful.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not even saying, as you know, that we shouldn't ever use antipsychotics, but we need to know how harmful and toxic they are. And yet some people really find that difficult to swallow.
Yes. Let me take two calls. We probably won't take more than two. So don't hang in on there if you're planning to call in. Barbara in Ohio, she would like to talk about being depressed and not taking antidepressant pills anymore. Barbara, are you there? Barbara? This, Joanna, will be my first lost call, I think, since we started. We've been doing this now for many months.
I can hear Barbara.
Hello? Hello?
You there?
Hello? Yeah, I'm
Hi,
here.
Barbara.
Hi. I'll tell you what, I've been through hell this year. This is where I'm at. Actually, I took myself off of Effexor about 5 years ago, and I'd been taking it for a third of my life, okay? So I took myself off, and for 5 months I was really happy. I was, feeling my feelings, and it was terrific. And then after 5 months, I kind of had a relapse, and I went back to my doctor, and she put me on Zoloft, which made me really hyper. I think I kindled myself. But then she put me back on Effexor, and it was good for about a year and a half. I thought it was good. I felt like I was back to not being depressed. And I had an incident happen to me where I got fired from a volunteer job, and I got it made me very depressed and upset. And she tried me on like 7 things. She tried me on, she gave me lithium, she gave me Lamictal, she gave me a bunch of stuff. She took me off Effexor again in 2 weeks using Prozac, and I was like climbing up and down the stairs and going crazy. Yeah. And she's really screwed up my brain.
Let me ask, did you ever get therapy? Did you ever benefit from therapy or from any other approach?
I was getting therapy. I was doing really well until I had this incident where I got fired from the volunteer job. I thought I was doing pretty well. But my problem is now she did try to push Abilify on me. I only took Lamictal for 10 days and lithium for 10 days. She didn't even taper me off nothing. She tapered me off of nothing. And I turned down the Abilify, and she's trying to push Seroquel, and of course they're trying to push ECT on me. But right now, and then she tried Remeron on me.
Let me ask, Barbara, are you getting any help now that's real help?
Well, I mean, there's nowhere to go. I hate to say it. I wish there were people like you all over the place that I could go to. And, there are no people who don't believe in antidepressants. There aren't any. You can't find anybody.
Have you got a therapist at the moment, Barbara?
Well, I did find I'm going to tell you what I'm left on. I'm left on Remeron. I'm taking 3 milligrams of Remeron. Mm-hmm. And because I'm afraid of, and the worst thing she gave me was a benzo. That's the worst thing. But let me,
Barbara, there's so many terrible things that happen, and the ins and outs are hard to even describe on air. So I want to and I think Joanna's thinking the same thing. There are good therapists out there, and you could get. Where in Ohio are you?
I'm in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay, would you look up Pam Popper, Popper? She's a nutritionist I work with in Ohio. She actually sells courses that I give with her. And through some of those courses, you can even have some contact with me. And she knows therapists in Columbus, Ohio. So I can I'm not very good at multitasking when I'm on the air, but Pam's been on this show, and you can look her up in my archives. But just look up Pam Popper and her organization. You're right, in Columbus, Ohio, and I'll be there in November of this year. But she knows therapists, and see if somebody there can give you some help and direction. Would you give that a try?
I would, but let me ask you one more thing. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent a third of my life on Effexor. Now, and they are pushing ECT on me. And I listen to you, and I'm scared to death to try it because you make it sound horrible.
Oh, ECT? Yes, I think it should be banned. It is horrible. It's a series of terrible concussive assaults on the brain. You can go to my website, Breggin.com. Well, go to listen, learn for yourself. Please go to 123ECT, www.123ECT.com. And get in touch with Pam Popper. She's not a therapist. She's a physician. She's not even doing treatment. She's doing education. She can give you a referral, and you could start to maybe work from a whole new viewpoint. I have to go now. I want to take another message, another caller. And by the way, I have this brand new computer, and it's got this technology, and it flashes messages to me now, which I don't even know whether they're coming out of the email and one of my emails is in fact Breggin Live at hotmail.com for the radio show. But Bonnie Burstow, who's been on these shows, sent me a message. I don't think she knew that I was going to get it on the air, and I couldn't quite make it out, Bonnie, but hello. And she could give me a call afterward. And then my assistant flashed me. I don't know if they know the messages are coming up, and I'm not sure just how they are. And Joanna, he's not able to locate that article or that concept. So do send me the article in ECT.
I will.
And let me go to Carol in Michigan, who has a question. And I'm going to be going kind of a little shorter than usual on questions. We have a couple of other people. I'm not sure I can get to you folks. But Carol?
Thank you for being available.
You're welcome. And Joanna's available too.
Thank
Dr.
you,
Moncrieff.
Joanne. Yeah, I appreciate what you do. I've followed and read from your website. My situation is this. We adopted our daughter Ashley 25 years ago. She was 6 years old. She has fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, so her brain was affected by the alcohol that her birth mother drank. She also has mild cognitive impairment. She has an IQ of 70. She also experienced tremendous amounts of trauma, abuses in the foster system before we adopted her. Her growing up, and she came when we adopted Ashley. She had been on Ritalin, and they said she had ADHD. I didn't, I personally am a nurse and very holistic in my approach, and medication only when it's needed, and recognize the excess and abuses of medication in all areas. Ashley grew up with no medication, very healthy diet. It was challenging. She had ups and downs, emotional instability, a lot of good cognitive, counseling, therapies, counseling, and life was difficult but quite stable until she was 19. She had significant crisis involving her birth sister, who we also adopted, and at that point in time, Ashley began expressing rages and threatening to kill herself. It was an explosive, and it scared us all. We went in for evaluation, and I did not know that they would admit her, and we had no access to her because we were not her guardian. We now are her guardian. However, at that time, she went through a year of in and out of hospitalizations on medications where she was violent, and our lives were in danger in many different areas for a year and a half. We got guardianship, and I was able to find a psychiatrist, Dr. Corinne Lazar, in our area.
Carol, we're going to just run flat out of time. I would love to hear a question that Joanna or I could respond to. I'm just going to get a notice saying we're ending soon. So how can we help you?
Okay, so Ashley was able to get stabilized
on Triliptol 150 BID, which she's been on for 8 years, but it's been challenging. Her mood swings have been quite extreme. And
what is it? Yeah. Carol, I think you're a saint, first of all. Let me see that before we run out of time. I mean, it's just astonishing. But I've got about a minute left. So could you just sort of ask something we could respond to? I really would like to give you something that you might want.
She started on atomoxetine 7 weeks ago, and it was the first time since she was a young girl that she's had stable emotions. 10 milligrams. She's going back after 2 months to her psychiatrist, and she just had her first downturn, and I'm wanting a response to you if she suggests increasing that atomoxetine. It's right now just at 10 milligrams. I've been reluctant for any medication, but it sounds like in some cases, I'm just looking for your opinions about it as positive as it's been, even though I'm reluctant to maybe have her increase it.
Well, it's common for the early doses of drugs because they give a new suppressive effect that the brain hasn't responded to. So that's really common. Joanna, we have literally now, we're in seconds. I'm not sure I have much time other than to say goodbye to you, Joanna. Do you have anything you want to say to Carol?
What you said, Peter. I mean, it seems like a wonderful thing you've done to have, helped this young girl who was a young girl and young woman who obviously has, lots of issues to deal with and lots of difficulties. And it's very difficult to advise on the rights and wrongs.
The more
of
you
treatment
could get
without knowing all the details.
Get direct help.
I'm sure that your love and support is the most
maybe on
thing.
Medicaid, Medicare, kind of. You could get some help in the home. Surround yourself with more service people. Provide that. This child needs a lot of support, and maybe there's services in your community. The new drug is probably not going to be the answer. It's going to pile on harm. But I can't say that medically on the air. I can't come to a conclusion. I don't know the story. But there's a familiar pattern of drugs working in the beginning because they flatten emotions. Get some services. That would be my suggestion to you. Look for more services for yourself. You must be worn out. Get some more services for yourself. There's volunteers that can come in. Joanna Moncrieff, thank you for being on the show with me again.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure.
It's so good to talk to you at length a little bit. A little bit at length. That's not exactly makes sense. But thanks for being on the show. My wonderful audience, thanks for bearing with us and listening and working with us and being our friends. Thank you so much, the wonderful folks out there. Bye-bye now.